Brought to you by Hallow, the world's #1 prayer app.
Somebody was like, whey protein causes inflammation. And I'm like, oh, it does?
Yeah.
Okay, well, here's all these studies that show the exact opposite, that it actually lowers inflammation. There's one of two options here. Either you don't know this data exists, in which case you should not be talking, or two, you know it exists, it doesn't fit your bias, and so you don't care.
You and I can both be scrolling social media on the same thing, and one guy pops off, and I'm like, what an idiot. And you have this thing in your guts where you're like, stop, I'm gonna go burn that guy's house down. Like, where does that come from?
I think for me, when I first got into this industry, it was like early 2000s. And it was basically by posting on bodybuilding message boards. I started to get a name on there, started to write for different websites, different magazines, and then started my coaching business. And I was kind of one of the first people to do online coaching at scale.
Okay.
And you can learn so much through a PhD, but man, I learned the most by working with people.
That's it. That's
Right. And I just saw some of the information that was being given to people and the downstream effects of that, of the misinformation, of people just kind of winging it, And I think for me, going through the graduate school experience and having a really great PhD advisor, Don Lehman, I still got to give him a ton of shout out because, he got a Lifetime Achievement Award this past year, and we were sitting down at dinner, me and him and a bunch of his old graduate students.
The fact that y'all did that, by the way, is so rad.
Oh, I loved it.
That all his students came back. That's pretty special.
That group of people will probably never be in the same room again together. Cool, it was awesome. And he said, I was just okay with being wrong. And when I got to grad school, I think I just had so many of my ideas crushed repeatedly that I'm like, oh, it's okay to be wrong. Yeah. Right? Like, it's okay. And so I'm not upset at people for being wrong. I think what I'm upset about is people, because everyone was ignorant at some point.
Sure.
Right?
That's right.
But when you have been shown something repeatedly that not only says that what you're saying isn't accurate. Actually, the opposite thing, this is true in a lot of cases, like some of these people that I debunk. And you're still doing it. It's either, there's kind of two roads you can go down. Either they're making money from it, and so they can't really change course. But I actually think the more powerful portion of this is people tie their identity into some of this stuff. They tie their identity into a diet or a supplement program or a style of training. For sure.
Yeah.
And I can even even identify with that, right? And so
is it a sense of justice for you?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and I think again, going through the graduate school experience where I got to see myself be wrong so much. And even I'll never forget the first talk I ever gave at experimental biology, which is like the Super Bowl for nerds, right? It's like 300 people in a room. I'm in my third year of grad school, and I was giving a talk, and I thought I knew this stuff. And a professor gets up, and he totally dresses me down in front of a room of scientists. And it was embarrassing. Yeah. It hurt. And I went and sat down, and Lehman was sitting next to me, and he said, you did pretty good. He goes, you're not supposed to go that hard on a graduate student as a professor, and I want to talk to that guy. But I don't hold it against that guy. In fact, it was really good for me because I remember what that felt like. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to know my stuff next time.
That's it.
I'm going to go and get the answers so that I understand the nuance of this stuff, so I'm not up there looking like an idiot, right? And so I think that took me 5 minutes to self-reflect and go, okay, maybe that guy went a little bit too hard on me, but I allowed it to happen, right? By not,
I set the table,
yeah, by not doing my due. If I knew what I was talking about, really in depth, it would have never happened.
And so it would have been real easy for you to become the victim in that moment,
right?
And instead it was, no, that was harsh, but that was a learning opportunity, and I'm going to make the changes I can do. All I can control is me here.
Yeah, and so I think when I see some of these people, so confidently saying things that are just totally not true.
Right.
So kind of the catch line on my video series is, if only we had human randomized control trials that actually, we have dozens.
Yeah, right, yeah.
And, it's like there was a recent one where somebody was like, whey protein causes inflammation. And I'm like, oh, it does?
Yeah.
Okay, well, here's all these studies that show the exact opposite, that it actually lowers inflammation.
Yeah.
Okay. So either there's one of two options here. Either you don't know this data exists, in which case you should not be talking, or two, you know it exists, it doesn't fit your bias, and so you don't care.
Yeah. But you as a coach have seen the impact on human beings.
And honestly, a lot of the downstream stuff I've seen, I'll give you an example where stuff is counterintuitive and what can happen when this messaging, because human beings aren't robots, right?
Of course,
we got all this like weird wiring in our heads. I dealt with so many people who had disordered eating patterns from things they'd been told, right?
You've helped me with that. Yeah, I have that.
And like, that's why people will say, when somebody says sugar's toxic, I'll go, and I'll explain why, not really. And now,
in the volume with which I consume it, toxic, but.
Well, and people go, well, why are you defending sugar? Well, I'm not defending sugar, but I think it's important to understand, like, I don't think a diet high in sugar is a good idea, but it's not because sugar has like some inherent chemical property to it that's caused, like, carbohydrates break down into sugar.
Right.
Like, that's what enters your bloodstream when you eat carbohydrates of any form.
Right.
Okay, so if sugar is toxic, then carbohydrates are toxic.
Gotcha.
So I think it's important to understand this stuff, because what I saw was people who believed this stuff, a lot of times would be the opposite outcome, which is they would completely try to abstain from this stuff, and guess what happens? They'd end up binge eating on this stuff, and there'd be so much shame wrapped up in it, and there'd be so much.
And the only way to make the shame go away is to eat more.
Right.
Yeah. Or like me, bro, I've skipped Easter.
Yeah.
I've skipped. I've not eaten cake at one of my kids' birthdays once.
Right.
And so I end up, like, in the name of this thing I was taught or told from a very confident source. Dude, I missed out on important markers, right?
Well, I think that's the other thing that people don't realize is, like, food isn't just fuel. Like, there's it's community, it's cultural. Yeah. People want to talk about, we should ban ultra processed foods, and I go, listen, the bullet is out of the gun. We're not putting it back in.
Yeah.
All right. We need to learn how to live with this. Okay. And so I try to help people understand, I don't think it's a good idea to eat a lot of sugar, but it's not because it's toxic. Because here's what happens when people believe that kind of stuff. There's no area for nuance or dosage, right?
Yep.
And also, people do weird things like, well, I'm not going to eat fruit because sugar's toxic. Because the sugar in fruit isn't any different than the other sugar.
Right. Except it's not bound to a fiber.
If it's toxic,
Yeah. I even heard a few years ago there was that protein eventually breaks down into, is it protein something genesis that breaks down to sugar eventually?
I mean, protein, so gluconeogenesis.
That's it.
So yeah. I mean, you can convert.
You can keep playing that game all the way out, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
And I can construct a narrative to make you afraid of anything.
Yeah.
Fat, carbohydrate, protein. I can construct those narratives. And again, what I saw so often was people trying to abstain from these things and ended up actually eating more of it because of it. And then when I kind of, like, I'll never forget, I had a client one time and I said, hey, listen, here's what I want you to do. Okay. I want you to, can you eat these calories? All right. And have a small bowl of ice cream every night. And if you don't lose weight because sugar's stopping you from losing weight, then we'll cut it out. But just have it. And after 2 weeks, they're like, oh my God, I've lost 3 pounds and I was still able to have some ice cream. I'm like, yeah, you're fine. Like, it's a dosage thing. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now, just like, with Ramsey, talk about budgeting, right? If you can still take care of your responsibilities, your mortgage, your utilities, food, et cetera, and you have a lot of money left over and you're taking care of all your responsibilities, a sports car might not be a great investment, but if you like it and it gives you some joy,
right?
If it fits in your budget, There's nothing in Ramsey stuff that says, hey, don't go buy a sports car.
No, Dave says, yeah, if you can light it on fire in your living room and it won't change your life,
then do it.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how I look at like, treats and processed food and all that kind of stuff. Like, okay, if you're like sedentary and you don't expend much energy every day, yeah, your budget's going to be pretty small. And does it make sense for you to like allot some of that towards, piece of cheesecake or ice cream or whatever? No, probably not. But if you have a larger budget, and also if you allot some of this and you are able to moderate it, and I hold, everybody's different.
Yep.
But if you are able to moderate it and it helps keep you consistent, like for me, if I know I can have the foods I like, but I just got to kind of fit them into my budget,
yeah,
I'm fine.
Like I remember having tacos with you once. I was like, I don't know how. I think you had 1 drink and 2 tacos. Mm-hmm. And I have chips and queso and taco. Like, I'm getting another taco. Like, yeah, I just get out of control. And but again, it goes back to know thyself, right?
Yeah, know thyself. And again, I actually stayed with a couple one time where the girlfriend was doing her master's in psychology.
Ah, yeah.
And she was like, here's what I noticed about Lane. When he's in control of his food, he by default picks very low calorie options. But he also didn't turn down any dessert I made. Mm-hmm. He didn't turn down. So I am in my head doing this budget and doing this exchange. Like if I want to go out and have a few drinks, sure, well, then I'm not going to eat as heavy of a dinner. Right. Or I'm going to hold over. I'm going to not eat as much earlier in the day so that I can have more later. It's budgeting. So I saw how much damage this stuff caused people, that I worked with, this messaging. And I think that's what got me kind of vitriolic about it.
Yeah.
And I have actually tried to pull that back a little bit. I've tried to save the vitriol for like the repeat offenders,
right.
Where it's like very obvious that they don't care about getting it right. Yeah. But I have seen people who I've called out who have changed their views on some things.
You did that to me. You read my first book and you called me and you're like, hey, great book. You were wrong here. But I needed that. I was right. And as a guy who worked in science, it's not an indictment. It's as much as it's a, dude, you put a piece of iron out here to be sharpened and I happen to can sharpen that side of that thing. Right.
Well, I think
and it's a gift. It's a blessing.
And it's funny, like some of the, like everybody struggles with different things, right? Like you can give me a feedback on a scientific thing and I'm probably not going to take it super personal, right?
Right.
But I took things personal at feedback in relationships,
sure.
Like that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
And like, there's so many like parallels across different things in life, But like I said, one of the things I've tried to do is like, okay, if somebody sends me a video of somebody, like something that'll trigger me, right, is when I see people saying things that are very, very untrue, especially if they're like trying to use the veil of science. Like it's one thing for a bro who's jacked to just be like, this is what made me jacked.
Right.
Okay, fine. Right. Like you're wrong, but I'm not. It's another thing for be like, scientists at Harvard showed X, Y, Z. I'm like, oh yeah? Let me go read that study. Cool study. Let me go pull up the study. I can remember very clearly one time, this one guy I've called out a bunch. He would never say me by name, which is very smart on his part. But he was kind of trying to respond to some things I'd said about artificial sweeteners. And he said, in this study, they gave subjects artificial sweeteners. By the way, when they say subjects,
mice.
It was in rats. Yeah. They gave subjects aspartame and they gained more weight and X, Y, Z. And I'm like, And then he said the PubMed ID. And I'm like, I'm going to go read this study.
Yeah.
Mistake. Don't give the PubMed ID to me. And it turns out, it was in rats. And also...
12x their body weight or something?
No, they actually lost weight. The group getting artificial sweeteners lost weight. I'm like, not only was you get this wrong, it's the opposite of what you said. And even like, there was a very well-known scientist who was on a really big podcast with a podcaster who I have a good relationship with. And I was watching the interview and he said, they did this study where they had everybody drink either a liter of soda a day, a liter of diet soda a day, a liter of full-fat milk, or a liter of water. And in 6 months, the people drinking a liter of cola gained 10 kilograms. The group drinking the Diet Cola gained 2 kilograms. And then I can't remember the water or not, the full fat milk, he said. I think they said, they lost weight or whatever. And he said it was a study out of Copenhagen. So I'm like, all right, where can I find this thing? So I spent probably 5 hours trying to track down this study and finally found it because he mentioned it in a blog, and I was able to find the original study. And I'm like, so he either didn't read this study at all or he fabricated the results. So yes, it was a liter of those things. It was actually semi-skim milk. It wasn't full-fat milk. There was actually no differences between the groups in the amount of weight gain. Like the cola group gained the most weight, but it wasn't statistically significantly different from the other groups. And actually, based on raw data, the group getting Diet Cola didn't gain the least amount of weight. Actually lost a little bit of weight. Yeah. And I'm like, millions of people heard this podcast, and I was the first one to be like, so out of the millions, nobody went and fact-checked this.
Download the Hallow app today and get 3 free months at hallow.com/Delony.